Well, good afternoon. Happy Friday, July 14th. Let's get right to it because I would call this comeback week. Comeback week for mortgage interest rates. After a bloodbath last week, we've seen mortgage rates rebound sharply this week, come down anywhere along the lines of 3/8 to a half a percentage point. Why did this happen? We got great news on the most widely recognized measure of inflation. That's the Consumer Price Index. I'll show you what I'm talking about. We'll flip the screen around here. We can see the headline Consumer Price Index. That's the year-over-year number dropping to 3%. Let's not forget, folks, that the Fed's target rate for inflation is 2% year-over-year. We are getting down there, beating expectations. The core CPI, which strips out volatile food and energy, dropping 4.8% against a little over of a 5% expectation. That is excellent news. Here's a graphical format to kind of show you how sharply inflation appears to be dropping as we move into the second half of 2023. So what's going on with the Federal Reserve? Well, we got interesting news that one of the Fed presidents, Jim Bullard, is stepping down. Matter of fact, it was announced yesterday. Here's an article from CNBC announcing that Jim Bullard's stepping down in August, leaving the Federal Reserve. While that's somewhat noteworthy, what's really noteworthy is what he had to say about inflation. I'm going to scroll to the bottom here and I'm going to read this to you because it's really, really important to get this insight. So back in May, Jim Bullard said rates, and he's talking about the Fed funds rate, needs to go up by another half a point to curb inflation. That's the goal. Wait a second. What's the goal? The goal is to curb inflation. Since then, the Fed has raised by 25 basis points, half of the figure that Jim wanted. And then he said, quote, yesterday, "The risk with inflation is that it does not turn around and go back to a low level." Well, wait a minute, it's trending towards going back to a low level. He goes on to say, as long as the labor market, why are we talking about the labor market? I thought the goal was to bring inflation back down. That was the goal. Why are we now shifting the language to say as long as the labor market is so good and Americans are making more money, it's a great time to get this problem behind us and not replay the 1970s. And there you go, folks. This is the issue with our Federal Reserve. Our Federal Reserve is operating off of a 1970s playbook where we saw wage growth eclipse 10% in some instances. We are nowhere near that right now. As a matter of fact, wage growth is moderating. We do not have a replay of the 1970s on our hands, and by their very own words, the goal was to get inflation down. And I just showed you, based upon the Consumer Price Index, inflation across all categories is moderating. Let's go and take a look at this wage question here. This is the United States wage growth over the past, taking you all the way back into the 60s. And you can see here we are right here, right around 5% in terms of year-over-year wage growth, right? And that's not terrible. That's not fantastic. It's certainly down from when we exited the pandemic. It's also down from when we went into the pandemic. But if we go back here and look at the 70s and wage growth, we see these wild swings, sometimes upwards getting close to 13, 14%. Maybe right here around 12%. The average wage growth in the 1970s, around 8 to 9%. We are nowhere near that. We do not have a wage growth problem in this country. And really, when you start thinking about it, this is what they're referencing is the past 10 years. They're accustomed to seeing this level right here, this really low kind of 3% wage growth level. That's where they want everything to be to bring inflation down. That's what would make them feel more comfortable. And this is such an aberration for them, this 5.5%, 6% wage growth, that's what they're hanging their hat on. And sure enough, this is what we're forecasting or what we're seeing for the prospects of a Fed rate hike later this month on July the 26th, a 96% chance that our Federal Reserve is going to, yet again, raise the Fed funds rate by 1/4 of a point, even with very clear data that states across all categories inflation is moderating, wage growth is moderating. We're still going to raise the Fed funds rate, or at least there's a 96% chance we're going to raise the Fed funds rate in late July. If that doesn't make you want to walk into the ocean, folks, I don't know what will. We have a distinct issue with our Federal Reserve. And if we can get our Federal Reserve on the same page with the rest of us, which is we all want to see inflation come down, it's coming down. We're going to pause now and we're going to evaluate data as we move through the second half of the year. You would continue to see improvement in mortgage interest rates, you would continue to see improvement in housing affordability, and that will lead to an increase in transactions and inventory. Folks, we've got to get our Federal Reserve on the same page with the rest of the country. In the meantime, if I can be of service to you over the weekend, don't hesitate to reach out. Mark.Milam at HighlandMTG.com. Have a good weekend.